Everybody shout. Come on now, sing out. It's time for the ghoulies. Get together. They got jokes for everyone, with laughter, songs and fun. So let's go to the ghoulies. Get together. Come on everybody, join the ghoulies. Gonna do their thing for you.
Stand and deliver, a like, share and subscribe. A Patreon donation will help me to survive.
Hello lovelies, I want to show you something a bit different today. This is Hardware, the definitive SF works of Chris Foss. Briefly, take the opportunity to explain a few things. When I do these top-down reviews, I only do them in 720p and I put shit over them because some publishers get very antsy about their pages being visible even for a fraction of a second. Right, so it adds a little bit of visual flair and also kind of acts in a way to stop people being able to apparently pause every few frames and get their material for free, which is obviously a thing that really happens in the world and that we need to be careful of. So that's part of it. Also out of respect for other creators and their works. So yeah, you can't get everything for free, not that you ever could. Anyway, also when I give things marks, I use a 5-point scale for style and for substance. Style is somewhat ephemeral. It's partially a matter of taste. Substance is whether there is anything behind that style. I don't have to like the style to give things a high style score. It just has to be consistent and effective and to convey what they're trying to think about. And substance wise, when I'm doing games, is there really a complete workable game here that can be played or not? If you get to that level, that's an average score, which is a 3. So you can reckon that 3 is an average score for style and substance. I combine them for a score out of 10. You can reckon that 5 or 6 is about average there. If anything scores above average, it is genuinely above average and worth it to you. If you're already interested in something and it only gets an average score, then it's probably still worth you getting, because at least there's enough there to be getting on with. Anyway, this is not a game book, but Chris Foss, the artist, has been very influential on a lot of stuff that does intersect with games, computer games, role-playing games, Traveller, for example, because Chris Foss is fairly undisputedly the GOAT when it comes to spaceship illustrations, and his works adorned the paperback covers of decades of science fiction books. Right. And he's painting the sort of sci-fi masterpieces in very old school painting techniques, unlike someone like, say, Tim White, who was a heavy airbrush user, but I love his work too. But anyway, this isn't just an art book. There is a lot of information in here as well about his early works and ideas, and kind of reaching around to find his style, and you can sort of see that influence, the 60s and 70s influence, coming through. A lot of influence, I think, coming from a lot of continental European artists as well. But even in these very early works, you can see the kind of Baroque mechanized stuff that would then go on to become his signature. As I say, Foss was the the absolute epitome of that kind of 70s and 80s science fiction starship illustrator. It's hard to put into words how influential this was, but it was such a distinctive style that you could scan the bookshelf at a bookshop and you could pick out the titles that were likely going to be of interest because of Foss's signature style being present on the cover, illustrating these cyclopean weird machines. This one's fairly iconic. I think that was done for Jodorowsky's Dune, perhaps. I especially like his yellow and black striped pirate vessels, which I think quite heavily influenced the early Eldar, particularly the Corsairs in the original Rogue Trader book, and so on. Or at least it's a hell of a coincidence otherwise. So when I think of my own science fiction games and the ships that are in them, or when I ask for art, or I stoop to generating art, it's the kind of it's the Chris Foss style that I am aiming for, asking for, that I want to see. Because to me that instantly evokes that era of science fiction, both the more serious sci-fi masters and the more pulpy. I mean, there was an introduction to this by Mobius, for example, who is perhaps best known for his work in Heavy Metal magazine, not the musical genre, but the comic magazine. And so, yeah, this is what I think of. Probably gonna get in trouble for having nipples, aren't I? But you can see that he didn't just do science fiction. There's some fantastical elements as well. There's quite a bit of wartime and other vehicle illustration. I guess you could think of him in terms of some of the great Japanese mecha artists, right? Some of them get a name of their own for the way in which they're able to illustrate gigantic robots and so on in a way that makes them feel weighty and real, or super stylized and effective. And Foss's starships don't necessarily feel real, but they do feel like they have a weight to them. They're often encrusted with all manner of devices and pylons, add-ons. They don't necessarily make sense immediately to our mind, but they often do still make sense emotionally, in that, yeah, they have this kind of realish feeling to them. I find them to be, many of them, a lot like Jerry Anderson's models in things like Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet, and so on, in that those were all models filmed in slightly slow motion to give them a bit more weight and sense of scale. And they were also encrusted with doodads for leftovers from model kits. I forget the term that FX artists use, but there is a special term they use for the sort of cruft that they put on top of things. And Foss has always kind of done that visually. I think that's from Cities in Flight, which is a fantastic book that more people should read, quite frankly. But that ship is a bit tame for Foss. But then that book's not really about spaceships, it's about these cities. Whole flying cities, which we have there. I'll see if anything else comes to me. I mean, this style of cover, this style of science fiction and fantasy art has gone out largely, I think, as a more of a cost-cutting measure than anything. Most book covers these days are fairly simple and graphical. They do not encourage your imagination. They do not draw you into the book. It just seems to be oh, we'll just get someone's cousin to get an SVG from a stock art site and slap that on there. That'll do. That'll do, pig. That'll do. I think that's an enormous shame. Not only because it is starving the science fiction and fantasy greats that we still have of work and income as they get old and retire or semi-retire, but just because it makes our bookshelves so much more impoverished. I tend to find. And then like indie authors and so on, alright, fair enough, you can't afford to hire people like that. Though these days they're probably a lot more affordable than they used to be, those of them who are still with us. But so many indie authors, art choices, font choices, even, you know, if they're just using a stock art image, they just slap it on there and choose some horrible childish font that's virtually illegible, and they put zero thought into the cover. And so it's just such an absolute crying shame to me. You know, a lot of these art pieces ended up being used in multiple ways. Like, they might be out there as a book cover, they might be out there as the cover of a computer game, they might be out there as posters. So it's not like it's necessarily impossible to license pieces of art like this, even ones that have been already used. There's no particular reason why you shouldn't be able to approach the artist's estate or their agent and ask if you can use any of these pieces for a reasonable fee. You can negotiate. I've tried, but I still can't afford it. But other people, if you just need a one-off for a cover or something, then why not pay for the license? I don't know. I guess everyone thinks and feels that they want something new and different, but a lot of this stuff hasn't necessarily been seen a great deal. Yeah, I actually got to know the names of a lot of these artists because I was interested and I wanted to see more. Foss, obviously. Jim Burns is still with us. He's a fantastic artist. Everything that he paints, unlike what a lot of what Foss paints, is curvaceous. Not just the women, but the spaceships and the vehicles and everything else too. They have this sort of soft, organic kind of feel to them. He designed the spinner for Blade Runner, and he designed a portable phone for Blade Runner that ended up becoming the iconic pistol. So that's a bit weird. Tim White, I mentioned. I really loved his work. You know, my dad used to buy the fantasy art books, and I would spend hours and hours poring over them, looking at the detail and the boobs. Let's not fool ourselves. Chris Akios, also another fantastic artist. But we're here to talk about Foss today. I mean, that looks slightly ridiculous as a spaceship, right, in terms of shape and so on, but the detail and everything else just makes it feel real. Doesn't that inspire you? Don't you want to climb into the cockpit of that and hurtle between a couple of planets? And that one's fantastic, with the smoke trails and everything coming behind it. Of course, a lot of people my age and older got to know Chris Foss and a lot of other fantasy and science fiction artists through the Terran Trade Federation books, the Great Space Battles, the Proxima War, all of those sorts of books, which are all fantastic. And there was an RPG of it for a while, which is a little underwhelming, and they did CGI versions of all the artwork, which was a bit disappointing as well. I guess that was to do with the rights issue, and illustrating a whole book is a different kettle of fish to illustrating a cover. That was used in one of the Lensman books, if I remember right. So it's a shame that the Terran Trade Authority game didn't really take off or do particularly well, but then it wasn't really around very long think I still have the PDFs that I bought somewhere, but yeah, switching to CGI was a bit of a disappointment. And while these have a weight and a sense of reality to them, when you move them into a 3D model, somehow they lose something. I think it's because our mind allows us to give a little bit if something is a painterly representation rather than CG or a photograph of a model or something where errors and things that don't quite line up and so on leap out at you. So when you try to get these strange shapes that Foss has created into 3D, or when you try to turn them into a 3D printed model, then I think something gets lost. It's a bit like trying to model one of Escher's staircases in 3D. Like it's not gonna hook up, or you can only view it correctly from a certain angle in a best case scenario. And the more baroque and crazy versions of things that Foss has done similarly, I think, don't translate that well into the other way of looking at things. Now this inspired a giant robot story in, I think, Robusters in 2000 AD, where this big robot became like the protector of Liverpool or something. So yeah, you can see how the inspiration lines move from place to place to place. You see that this is what's in my head when I run sci-fi games. It's the feeling I would like to evoke during space battles and things. Strange alien landscapes, cyclopean baroque starships with big massive elements on them, with distinct visual styles to them. It's a lot harder to convey in prose, unfortunately, especially when you're put on the spot in the middle of a space battle or something between the characters and whatever they're facing up against. It would be remiss not to mention Homeworld, right? The fleet management game, because that leaned incredibly heavily on Foss style coloration, at least, and certainly seems to have inspired many of the ships and so on within that. If you enjoy that sort of visual style, then you'll enjoy Foss, and vice versa. I tried replaying the first game in the Homeworld series recently and found it a little bit too clunky and kind of annoying to play very far. But visually, certainly, that's the computer game that most catches the vision of Foss. I think Foss's work was used on at least one edition of Traveller, but I forget which one. I kind of stopped keeping track of Traveller a while ago, but I think his influence can still be felt there, though Traveller's starships, generally speaking, are a lot more prosaic, practical, even though in space there's no reason why a ship should be any particular shape, because there's no drag. I think the most efficient use of space is a sphere, of course, but that would be rather dull, wouldn't it? But yeah, Foss has been a huge influence on me. His spaceships, his landscapes, his starfields, all of that, they are things that inspire me, influence me. He's definitely one of the greats, if not the greatest starship illustrator of all time. Zang.
Machinations of the Space Princess is an old-school RPG with a sci-fi setting. The rules are familiar and at once innovative. Opened up so you can play literally any alien species you can envision. Purchase it at RPG Now or Lulu.com.
And this is not a time to be dismayed. This is punk rock time. This is what Joe Strummer trained you for. It is now time to go. You're a good person. That means more now than ever.